Hello, hello. I'm going to play you something really quick. Anyone recognize this? This is not by me. There's surely a couple. Yeah, all right, good. It's important to me that at least some people know this because it's awesome. And as he telegraphed, by the way, start thinking of a nice one-sentence, interesting game idea that I'm going to solicit from you guys in a minute. This piece of music is called 7 League Boots from the album Into the Trees by Zoe Keating, and I am going to talk about why I played it in just a minute. Before I fully dive in, a bit of a disclaimer to get a context into everything I'm about to say. I come from a place of sort of like absurd idealism and willful naivete about everything. So if you're at all sort of cynical or jaded or grumbly, I apologize for the like rainbows and happiness that I'm going to be blasting at you. So feel free to leave if that's, I won't be offended. In fact, I'll be like, oh my God, where are you going? It's probably awesome. With that said, I think that right now is basically the start of the most incredible time to be probably any creator, but especially a musician and composer, than at any prior time in all of history. And I have two main reasons why I think that is. The first is that we have no real obstacles to distribution anymore. In prior eras, even if you are someone as monumentally talented as, say, the Beatles, you still have to go through this process of getting your music to change hands and find its way into the sort of politically most empowered person that they might have a shot of taking interest and help getting it out into the world. Because there were just only so many means for getting it into the world. And over the last 10 years or so, that has completely evaporated. Big record labels and things like that are essentially kind of all but useless to the vast majority of musicians now, which I think is amazing. I played Zoe Keating because she's essentially like the ultimate poster child to this. If I were a traditional record label sort of talent scout type person, I might hear something on an album like Into the Trees and think, oh, this is interesting, but how would I market this? How would I actually find a way to pack giant auditoriums full of people interested in hearing this? Which is not really what music is all about. That's just one aspect to it. And so to be able to live in a system where that decision, that mindset isn't even essential or even necessary at all is a step forward that I don't think can be overstated. It is absolutely incredible that there are no obstacles. And the other aspect to that that's really encouraging for musicians is that, and Zoe I think is again another wonderful example of this, the content of what you write is what furthers your music. The standard complaint you hear when distribution is so easy through whatever, SoundCloud, YouTube, Bandcamp, whatever, even just iTunes, is that now there's just so much out there. There's just a massive wall of noise and a lot of kind of ambient static. But I say, well, but the cream, again, this is the idealism coming out, the cream will always rise. The people that do things that are really genuinely amazing, people are gonna wanna share and help spread the word on. And again, Zoe Keating, phenomenal example. Because it's not being driven by marketing, it's being driven by a genuine love for the music. And never before have we been able to sort of empower the consumers in this way. And I think that that's absolutely fantastic. The standard sort of grumbly line that I hear from the sort of traditional distributors is they say, well, but the problem is no one wants to buy music anymore. It's all about free access. And how could we possibly survive? How could there be a legitimate business model here in a system like that? And my rebuttal there is sort of a personal anecdote. A couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago, a game came out that I had the joy of working on that you might have heard of, called Journey. And when Journey came out, we decided to release the soundtrack album a couple weeks after the game's release instead of a simultaneous day simultaneous day release. Genova Chen, the creative director, had brought up a really interesting point where he said the game leans so heavily on the music that if someone buys the soundtrack before they play the game, it's actually a massive spoiler, which I'd never really thought of before. And I thought, you know, actually, you're right. I don't want, as proud as I am of the music and as excited as I am to share this album with people, I actually would rather they play the game first. So I'm okay, let's just hold off. That's perfectly fine. And you know, the game came out and I was totally unprepared for the response that it got. I mean, still to this day, I kind of think it's all vaguely, I'm like in a coma somewhere and none of it actually happened. And so when we did put the album out, within the first 24 hours, which I suppose were I not willfully naive, I should have seen coming, the whole album was immediately uploaded to YouTube by random anonymous people. And I didn't even know, and then I get like a Google alert for my name that you know, suddenly there were all these different YouTube uploads of the soundtrack to Journey. But I was actually really quite struck by that. I thought, I can't believe that someone took the time to get a hold of it. Presumably they had to buy it. So they got a hold of it, and then, you know, sits there transcoding it, uploading it to YouTube, watching the little progress bar go. I'm like, someone actually put effort into this. So I went on to those channels and I wrote a comment like, hey, you know, hello, I'm the guy that wrote this, and I just want to thank you for uploading it, because I think that's amazing that you would want to share it, and I don't really have words to describe my gratitude to that. And then I didn't think anything of it. I went on about the rest of my day. The next day I get a message on Facebook and somebody says, hey, go to Reddit. Like, okay, anything in particular? Just go. I look right there on the homepage, like skyrocketing upward, was somebody who had gone to all the videos and just happened to see that I had commented on all of them, and they took a screenshot of it and threw it on Reddit with the caption of something to the effect of, hey everybody, look, this guy's not a douchebag. Which I was like, well, I'm glad the court approves. But they were actually really surprised to see that I had gone and was thanking people. So a sort of impromptu AMA emerged, where I then start responding on Reddit, where I said, well, what was I supposed to do? I don't think, this was not a malicious act. These were not people who were trying to steal from me, as is the perception by the kind of traditional record label distribution model. These were people who were excited by this music, which is inexplicable to me, but they wanted to share it, and so they decided to take part in doing that. So I said, you know, how could I be anything but grateful for this? You know, the goal is for people to hear it. And somehow they were, and it was something they were doing on their own, and I was really genuinely moved by that. So then I think, okay, you know, that's all well and good. And I leave, and I come back, and then the next day, I get a phone call from someone wanting to interview me from Billboard magazine. And there was a lot of press going on at that time, so that was itself not striking. But then I answered, and I said, you know, why are you calling me? Aren't you supposed to be talking to people like Rihanna and Adele? And he said, well, the Journey soundtrack is actually on the Billboard charts this week. And I said, excuse me? And he said, yeah, it's actually higher than any video game score ever has been in the history of Billboard. And so I went rushing back and looked at all the YouTube uploads and things, and they had amended the descriptions to say, here is where you can buy it on YouTube. This not a douchebag guy is someone you should consider supporting, so here's how you do it. And of course, I didn't ask for that. People took it upon themselves to say, you know, this is really cool. If you like it, please consider. Even like Pirate Bay, the most sort of supposedly, you know, under scourge of society torrents, had that in there. I was getting Google alerts from all these just blatantly sort of redistribution, not really legal, possibly malicious sites saying, here's how you buy this, by the way, we really, really recommend it. And it was the most humanity-affirming experience I'd ever seen in my life, because all I wanted to do was share it, and then this thing took off completely on its own. And so I think we've entered into a new period where, for example, I don't like the word fan. I don't like the idea of having fans. I don't want people to be fans of me. If they're fans of a particular piece of music, then that's something that I'm very touched by. But For me personally, I'm not actually interested in that. What seems to be the new model is that people are supporters. They actively take a part in your career because they can reach out into sort of the void of the internet and actually make contact with you directly. And they feel like, I'm not just buying a thing that has a name on it that doesn't mean anything. That's the guy. That's him on Twitter. That's him on Facebook. And if I write and say hi, he'll say hi back. And this is an actual, almost like a society of sharing. And you know, what more could a composer want? I'm reminded of Amanda Palmer's recent TED Talk where she said, no longer do we have to stop and say, you know, here's my music, take it or leave it. But we invite people to want to participate in this as almost like a process with us. And I think that's incredible. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that we have democratized the music creating process itself. And that's actually, I think, even more significant than the fact that we can share it so easily and so widely. I mean, like what you see here is, this is a very inexpensive setup. This is, you know, maybe a couple $1,000s worth of stuff, all of which actually could be gotten cheaper. Like you know, I have Digital Performer is what I use as a sequencer, for example, but you could use like GarageBand to make music and make actual legitimate viable music. And so even this could be boiled down to a couple of $100s. And the effect of that is actually, I think, not possible to overstate the importance of either. By democratizing, we have taken out the sort of elitism closed circle of the music making process. So in the past, the only way you had even the slightest chance at being a composer is through a very elaborate sort of conservatory style training where you go to a school, you know, like Juilliard or somewhere, and you study very rigorously, and then, you know, if you wanted to actually have your music played, you could maybe be lucky and have like an orchestra give you 5 minutes of their time, and it was essentially impossible to actually hear your own ideas. And then as the technology has evolved, the circle has been able to widen of who gets to be a composer. And so, you know, for composers themselves tend to really freak out over that, because it was like before I had, you know, maybe 50 viable competitors, and now I have like 400,000 and more every day. My simple response to that, to anyone who sees that as a profound negative, is to say, well, this isn't really about me, though. My investment is in the art itself. And I don't see any way that the art of music making won't benefit by having everyone be able to contribute if they want, no matter what they do for a living, and no matter what their long-term goal is, whether they want to be up in front of 10,000 people at like Carnegie Hall, or if they want to just sit at home and play with their kids and then go, you know, mess around on their computer for a few minutes. To me, that's irrelevant. What matters is that every single person can do it. And it's gotten really, really easy. In a way, we're crowdsourcing art itself. And I think that the long-term impact of that is something that we actually can't really predict. So with that end, I want to show you just how easy it is. So who has a really awesome single-sentence game pitch? And I will write a theme for your game right here. It will be terrible because of how fast I will be doing it. But somebody be brave and venture an idea.
Surviving Las Vegas.
Surviving Las Vegas. All right. I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen here. All right, so here is this Digital Performer up. So I gotta have my click going here, so forgive that. I'm gonna slow the tempo down here. And let's see. Oh. Well, never mind. No, I'm not. We'll go with that. Well, I hear that, and I immediately think of like a classic sort of almost like Sinatra thing, which will merge with some sort of weird horror aesthetic. So maybe some kind of like, you know. That sounds all right. So let's actually record that. So some little like. Just laying a little backbone here. All right, Now, it needs a little more, certainly. I guess we can add a little bit of a slight walking bass to it, maybe. Going with sort of a classic feel. Fair enough. Amazing. Possibly the most amazing thing of all time. You need a little bit of obligatory ride here, I think. Just something a little good. Ringo himself would have been proud. Maybe fill it out with just a touch of piano to give it a little bit of authenticity here. Just like Journey, basically. And for the sake of it being weird, we'll add, I would be remiss not to include a little harmonic, like accordion, because it's just, why not? You know, it's surviving Las Vegas, you know, with hope of like Paris on the horizon. Truly a top 10 single. And then, because it's surviving Las Vegas, we'll add one final little touch here. All right, there is your theme. Let me play it without the click now. Of course, I feel the need to keep changing it. That was a good suggestion. So clearly, this is the greatest piece of music ever written. Imagine if I'd spent like maybe 6 minutes working on it, or 30 minutes, or I, saved up a little money and invested in samples that aren't completely just off the shelf. Very little has to be done, but the point is, there's plenty of games out there that have sounds that are, very akin to these, that sound great, and have probably much better composers working on them for longer than 3 minutes in front of a live audience. Although I suppose anything to catalyze artistry is good. But the real significance of this to me is actually not in doing some stupid gimmick by a not douchebag like myself. When you think of classical music, if I put those words in your head, you probably think of a piece of music that was written during the 19th century by a European composer. If you go to see, your local orchestra, like for me, the LA Phil, or if it was like the New York Phil or Boston Symphony or even like a community orchestra. Today's Thursday, so probably 1 million orchestras are doing concerts tomorrow night. 95% chance that they will be playing a whole concert of, or at least something from, the 19th century by a European composer. That, when we say classical music, it is basically synonymous with that specific time period by those specific composers. You know, started essentially by Beethoven, brought to a finale by Mahler, composers like Mendelssohn, Schubert, Schumann, Chopin, Berlioz. So much of what we think of for that entire genre was made within a very small period of time, within a very specific part of the world. And overwhelmingly, all German composers, no less. And so you have to ask yourself why. Like, why is the orchestra not playing, for every Aaron Copland or Leonard Bernstein that they play, there's like 1,000 performances of Beethoven. Why would that be? Why do audiences want to hear it so much more than music of our time by composers like me, or countless other great ones? I should say countless great ones, and then me. Why is that? Or, you know, other than Mozart, who predates that period, there's very little from before that as well that the orchestras are interested in and that the audiences are interested in. And while the answer to that is a highly contentious subject that I could easily spend another hour on, and which there is no agreed upon answer, I think there's one really, really important ingredient, which is that in the 19th century, we were in the post-American Revolution, post-French Revolution, which brought about the creation of the middle class in a very real way in Europe. And one of the values treasured by the middle class was the ability to play an instrument. And because of the Industrial Revolution, the mass distribution and creation of pianos in particular meant that almost every home, basically regardless of their financial status, had a piano. And they would learn to play it. And like, for example, for women who were wanting to be considered marriable, it was actually more important that they be able to play the piano than even to like read, for example. And so there's a very interesting side effect to that when you have a massive populace who are actually sitting in front of an Oxygen 49M audio keyboard in the 19th century every single day. They are hungry for music constantly because they are crawling inside of it and they're getting to experience it in a very interactive and a very visceral way. So of course, they are, as such, empowering composers to be more adventurous and to push the bounds and to expand what they're doing. The other aspect to it is that going to hear a concert was actually kind of rare back then. The only way you could hear a piece of music was to learn to play it yourself. And so it's not really a short distance of that basic premise to a massive flourishing of the art itself. Radio came along once we, very quickly into the 20th century, we developed radio, and subsequent to that were records and CDs and all these other forms of musical distribution. And with that, the audience became passive, and they would listen. Now, they started consuming in numbers that vastly exceeded that of the 19th century, but they weren't making music themselves. Now, we're standing at the dawn of a completely new era that has no precedent, because you don't need a single bit of music education, a single bit of training whatsoever to be able to actually not just perform it, but make your own, to actually be a composer. And I think what that will do for the art of music itself is something we can't predict. It goes beyond anything that has ever happened before, and it's the greatest thing basically imaginable. So I will end with a quote from what is one of the great monologues in all of cinema, which was Peter O'Toole's as the critic Anton Ego at the end of Ratatouille, when he says, "In the past, I have made no secret of my disdain for Chef Gusteau's famous motto, 'Anyone can cook,' but only now do I realize what he truly meant. Not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere." And that's never been more true than now. Thank you.